Well, hello again, and welcome to the channel. This should be a fairly short one. I just wanted to take kind of a walk down memory road for myself because I've been daily driving Linux now for 4 years. In fact, I joined the Linux Cast 2-year challenge to kind of keep myself honest. One of the issues I always had when I started in Linux back in 2015 is genuinely sticking with it. It's been very difficult. It's something that I have struggled with my entire life, and probably something that not everybody struggles with. But I did back then. It was something that I couldn't handle because I wanted the new shiny and whatnot. And I've kind of grown to get out of that mindset and to not deal with that. It was kind of brought up recently because back in 2015, Linux was still kind of rough for me. There were things I still couldn't do, some things I could do. Um, in fact, for those that don't know, when I got married a few years back, I took my, at that time, daily driver laptop, which I think I had only been using Linux on it for a few months. I think I installed it in September and I took a vacation in November. And I think this was back in like 2020 or 2021, somewhere in there. Not super important, but I went out to California and I took this HP with me. I still have it. It's actually in the pile to get scrapped, because it's basically dead at this point. I tried to revitalize it, but it became a Frankenstein monster I couldn't rely on, and it's still kind of that way. So it needs to go. But the important part is I had finally decided on a distro. After years of using Ubuntu, Arch Linux, Manjaro, even OpenSUSE, I had finally reached a point of like, dude, I gotta find something that is a reasonable amount of work to maintain and something that doesn't require me to constantly be in the terminal if I don't want to. Obviously, I'm in the terminal right now, as you see, but I don't have to be. There's GUI options for me to do everything I need to do, regardless of what that task is. Now, there are some things you still need the terminal for. I will freely admit that. It is not a terminal-free zone, but there's tons of options out there. And Linux Mint has one of the most comprehensive GUI options. There are a few exceptions for things like fingerprint readers, which are getting fixed. But there was one thing that I wanted to bring up. Mint 20 hits end of life this month. It's kind of wild. And this is being recorded in June. You'll probably won't see it till July. I'll have to figure out my upload schedule. So I apologize. But it's going end of life. Mint 20 was the distro that brought me home. Brought me to Linux. Mint 19 wasn't quite good enough. The upgrade was pretty rough. And so I never continued on with it. I ended up on Pop! OS, I think, for a while. But Mint 20, specifically 20.2 is what I installed, but 20.3 was the version that I took to California with me. That was my workhorse. I didn't do a lot of work while I was in Cali, but I needed to travel with just Linux to prove a point that I could get by. I know it's a weird and stupid thing, but at the time I had this thing in my head that there was no way that I could make it happen. And that trip proved it to me. Now, the laptop got broken. What you find out is when you take a computer with you traveling like that, TSA doesn't exactly treat things very nicely, and they bent my laptop. So that's not Linux's fault. But this was brought up in a Mint post. Mint 20 end of life. It really has been 5 years of extended support already. To kind of go through that, I thought it would be fun to fire up a virtual machine here of Linux Mint 20.3. I have only installed the VM, installed the updates, and installed VirtualBox drivers. So it's basically a mostly vanilla install of Mint 20.3. And I just wanted to poke around for a minute and look at how much or how little things have changed compared to the way they used to be. Things like you saw the pop-up there, the virtual machine drivers that used to pop up and tell you, hey, you don't have hardware acceleration. In actuality, it still runs pretty good without that. But, that wasn't an automatic thing back then. Being on a laptop, we didn't have power profiles. In fact, Mint didn't come with anything in terms of power management. If I just go into power management, management, it was just about sleep settings. It wasn't really anything else. So you ran on the raw lift of the kernel, and I can tell you back then, battery life on Linux, not very good. That was something I do not miss. That has gotten substantially better. One of the other things, if I open up themes, is this interface has gotten a facelift since then. But the Mint Y was much flatter, and in fact, the Mint that I grew up with actually had they hadn't done Mint L yet with the square corners. This was the first version that did the rounded corners for the Mint theme, which was very much a controversial opinion then. We still had things like the Mint X and the Mint Y theme, but this is that kind of intermediate theme they had for a while with some rounded corners and such. And genuinely, I didn't mind this. I thought their colors were a bit drab, to be fair. You come in here and say, wanted blue. You would come in and you'd have to change 3 things to get blue. Let's see, Mint Y dark blue. And now I would have a dark blue minty theme. It's, again, a little bit on the drabbish side. So what I used to do is go in here and go to Mint YZ was my big kick back then. They had an icon theme and they had a folder theme. He's unfortunately archived it since then. This gentleman, Sebas Java, used to actually contribute to this, and he decided to go a different direction. I don't know that he's ever done another theme since then, but this essentially was like the precursor to the color scheme that Mint Y would go towards. This was a much brighter color scheme and whatnot, and this is what I used to run back then. Very straightforward to install. You downloaded it and put it in the .themes directory, and you're good to go. Same with the icons. And this gave, the sharp corners back of like the Mint X theme. Because when I first started using Mint, this would have been back in the Mint 17 days, it would have been the Mint X theme that was installed on this system. It would have looked very old school. But I'm very much a dark theme person. So I've always done dark theme. DMZ black. I always liked the black cursor. And that was just my jam. And so that would have been what my system kind of would have been like back then, had I stuck with it. Some other things, there is the driver manager, if I can type. And that would have done all your drivers. That's existed for a long time. But I can't change the modern one. If I actually swipe out here to the modern one, if I right click, we've got things for scripts. We've got things for display settings and open in terminal, open as root. And, we have some of those items here, but we don't have the new scripts menu. There's desklets. I never used them, but they existed. But I don't have anything. So to get display resolution stuff, you'd have had to go actually find the display settings and then go grab them. I do miss this here, the user scale. This used to work so much better in Mint 20.3. I know there was a lot of rebasing that happened in Mint 21, and it really did hurt Cinnamon's performance. I'm hoping that the transition to Wayland, they might be able to gain some of that back. But the interface scaling used to actually have pretty good performance. Now, obviously, this is huge on this screen, but this still had pretty good. It looks sharp. You don't get that with the modern implementation, and that is incredibly unfortunate. So much like back then, I would go into fonts or font selection. I forgot we actually had a font selector back then, and just bump this up by a couple so I could see, is all I'd end up doing. A lot of things were as they are. You still got the kernel manager and whatnot. And I mean, Mint is still Mint. That's kind of the big kicker here. But there have been some improvements to, you know, the system ever since then. Obviously, back then it was the 5.4 kernel. I actually remember on my T15 needing to install the Ubuntu OEM kernel so I could have full hardware support. That was something I was new to. And I had to use the command line to figure that out because, of course, the Mint kernel manager only shows the Mint kernels that were available, not necessarily Ubuntu kernels that were available. And probably something that dates this a lot, I'm going to let that refresh for a moment, is that software store. Yeah, we had extensions then. We didn't have the nightlight feature. That's another one that's come up since then. Just little things have changed. Overall, Cinnamon is still Cinnamon. Look at that. That is an old-looking software store. Now, in a lot of ways, to me, this was still pretty good. I understand why they changed it to what they did. But this is how it looked for me when I was using it, and installing stuff. And I guess I don't know entirely where I was taking this video other than this is kind of just a look back at what it was like when I started Linux and Linux Mint, and kind of taking a look back at the different, the way it was back then. Oh yeah, some of these good old wallpapers, the blue, the beach. I liked the beach back then. I think that's probably what I was running. I do miss back then when things were a little more simple. I didn't worry about flat packs. I didn't worry about all these software sources. I came in here and typed sudo apt update and typed in my password and then updated my system. Like, there was a GUI manager, and I did manage most of my updates through this, but I was learning, and so I do have a pretty good relationship with Mint in this era. With that, I hope you enjoy my little short ramble about Mint 20.3. If you are running it, let me know in the comments. Obviously, you shouldn't. You should upgrade your system. If you want me to do a video showing the Mint upgrade process, that's fine. There's plenty of videos out there that already show how to do it. But for that, I'll get out of here and let you get on with your day. So take care.